HOA turned my backyard into public parking lot, but discovered I'm the new city mayor. The setup that changed everything. What would you do if you came home one day to find 30 cars parked in your backyard? Not your driveway, not your front yard, but literally your private backyard, where your children used to play, where your dog used to run free, where you spent countless evenings barbecuing with your family. Well, that's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, and let me tell you, the HOA had no idea who they were messing with. But before we get to the epic revenge that left them scrambling to save their own homes, let me paint you the full picture of just how insane this situation became. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I've lived at 247 Maple Grove Drive for exactly 7 years. It's a beautiful suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where kids ride bikes on sidewalks and neighbors wave at each other while watering their lawns. At least, that's what it used to be before the Greenwood Heights HOA decided they owned everything within a 5-mile radius. This particular HOA wasn't your typical paint-your-fence beige-only type of organization. No, these people had delusions of grandeur that would make medieval kings jealous. The president of our HOA was a woman named Margaret Thornfield. And if you've ever met someone who peaked in high school as student council president and never got over it, you know exactly what type of person I'm talking about. Margaret was the kind of woman who would measure your grass with a ruler and fine you if it was a 1/4 inch too long. She wore her HOA president badge like it was a medal of honor, and she treated every neighborhood gathering like she was addressing the United Nations. The parking crisis that started it all now. Here's where the story gets interesting, and trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this, because what happens next is absolutely mind-blowing. The HOA had been facing what Margaret dramatically called the Great Parking Crisis of Greenwood Heights. Apparently, some residents had been complaining that there wasn't enough visitor parking on the weekends when people had family over or threw parties. Instead of doing something logical, like designating specific areas or creating reasonable guidelines, Margaret had a different solution in mind. 3 months ago, I was at my office downtown, busy with back-to-back meetings that were running late, when my neighbor Jennifer called me in a panic. "Sarah, you need to get home right now," she said, her voice shaking. "There are people in your backyard, and they're doing something crazy." I immediately thought someone was breaking in, so I rushed home, my heart pounding the entire 15 drive through downtown traffic. But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for what I saw when I pulled into my driveway. My beautiful backyard, the one with the vegetable garden I'd spent 3 years perfecting, the one with the swing set I'd built for my kids, the one with the fire pit where we roasted marshmallows every summer evening, had been transformed into a makeshift parking lot. There were orange cones marking out parking spaces, temporary gravel had been dumped over my flower beds, and worst of all, there was a hand-painted sign that read Greenwood Heights HOA, overflow parking residents, and guests only. I sat in my car for a full minute, just staring, trying to process what I was seeing. My sprinkler system had been ripped out. My prize-winning rose bushes had been bulldozed, and there were actual painted parking lines on what used to be my grass. It looked like someone had taken a Walmart parking lot and plopped it down in my backyard. The confrontation that revealed their true colors. I marched straight to Margaret's house, which was conveniently located just 2 blocks away in the fanciest section of our neighborhood. The woman answered her door, wearing what I can only describe as a power suit meant for someone running for president, not managing a suburban HOA. "Oh, Sarah dear," she said, with that condescending smile that immediately makes your blood pressure spike. "I was wondering when you'd come by to thank us for solving your property value problem." Thank them, thank them. I asked her what in the world she was talking about, and Margaret proceeded to explain, with the confidence of someone who'd never been challenged in her life, that, according to the HOA bylaws, Section 47B, subsection 12, any property that wasn't being used to its maximum community benefit potential could be temporarily repurposed for the greater good of the neighborhood. She claimed that because I didn't have any permanent structures in my backyard besides the swing set, which she dismissed as underutilized recreational equipment, my yard qualified as unused space. Besides, Margaret continued, adjusting her blazer like she was about to deliver a campaign speech, your property taxes will actually decrease because you're now contributing to the community infrastructure. It's really a win-win situation when you think about it logically. The audacity was breathtaking. She was standing there in her $300 outfit, explaining to me how destroying my property was actually doing me a favor. I asked to see these supposed bylaws, and Margaret disappeared for about 10 minutes before returning with a binder that looked like it had been assembled that morning. The pages were clearly printed on different dates. The formatting was inconsistent. And most telling of all, the signature page showed it had been approved by the HOA board just 2 days earlier. When I pointed this out, Margaret's demeanor shifted from condescending to downright hostile. "Listen here, Sarah," she said, dropping the fake sweetness entirely. "This neighborhood has thrived under my leadership for 4 years. We have the highest property values in the county, we have the lowest crime rate, and we have the most beautiful common areas. If you can't see that sacrificing a little personal space for the betterment of the community is worth it, then maybe you should consider moving somewhere more suitable to your individual needs." The legal battle that exposed everything that night, I called my attorney, thinking this would be a simple property rights case that could be resolved with a strongly worded letter. Boy, was I wrong. When my lawyer, David Chen, reviewed the situation, he discovered that what Margaret and the HOA were doing went far beyond just parking cars in my backyard. They had filed fraudulent documents with the city claiming my property had been donated for community use. They had applied for permits to install permanent parking structures. And most shocking of all, they had already collected over $3,000 in parking fees from residents who were paying $10 a day to park in what they thought was legitimate HOA overflow parking. David immediately filed for an emergency injunction to stop any further construction on my property. But here's where Margaret showed just how far she was willing to go to maintain her power. Instead of backing down, she doubled down. The next morning, I woke up to find that the HOA had installed concrete parking blocks overnight, effectively making the parking situation permanent. They had also put up a fence around the perimeter of my backyard with no trespassing HOA property signs every 10 feet. But Margaret wasn't done. At the emergency HOA meeting she called that evening, she presented what she called photographic evidence of my property being abandoned and neglected. The photos were clearly taken during the previous winter when my garden was dormant and the grass was brown, but she presented them as current evidence that I wasn't maintaining my property to community standards. She even had the nerve to suggest that my occasional work trips out of town proved I wasn't a committed community member. The other board members sat there nodding along like bobbleheads, and I realized this wasn't just about parking. This was about Margaret establishing a precedent that she could take anyone's property whenever she deemed it necessary for the community good. If she could get away with this, what would stop her from claiming someone's front yard for a community garden, or someone's garage for HOA storage? The investigation that revealed the corruption here's where the story takes a turn that even I didn't see coming. And trust me, you're going to want to stay with me, because this is where everything starts to unravel in the most spectacular way possible. While David was working on the legal side, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started by requesting all HOA financial records for the past 2 years, which, as a homeowner, I was legally entitled to review. Margaret fought this request tooth and nail, claiming that financial records contained sensitive strategic information that couldn't be shared with general members. When I finally got the records, after threatening to involve the state attorney general's office, what I found was absolutely staggering. The HOA had been collecting nearly $4,000 per month in special assessment fees that weren't being used for any legitimate community purposes. Instead, Margaret had been paying herself a $60,000 annual consulting fee for her HOA president duties. For context, most HOA presidents are volunteers, and even in high-end communities, compensation rarely exceeds $10,000 per year. But that wasn't even the worst part. The record showed that Margaret had been hiring her husband's construction company for all HOA projects at rates that were typically 200 to 300% higher than market value. The rabbit hole went even deeper. I discovered that Margaret had been systematically targeting homeowners who questioned her authority and finding violations that resulted in hefty fines. Mrs. Patterson down the street had been fined $500 for having a non-regulation mailbox. That was actually identical to every other mailbox in the neighborhood. The Johnson family had been hit with a $750 fine for excessive holiday decorations the previous Christmas, even though their display was smaller than Margaret's own elaborate setup. But the most shocking discovery was that Margaret had been working with a local real estate investor named Richard Blackstone to force out homeowners who couldn't afford the increasing fines and special assessments. Once these families sold their homes at below-market prices to escape the harassment, Blackstone would buy them, do minimal improvements, and resell them at huge profits. Margaret was getting a 10% kickback on every transaction. The revelation. That changed everything now. Here's where I need to share something that Margaret and the HOA board had no idea about. When they decided to turn my backyard into their personal parking empire. You see, 3 weeks before the parking lot incident, I had received some rather significant news about my professional life. News that I hadn't shared with anyone in the neighborhood, because I believe in keeping my personal and professional lives separate. News that was about to make Margaret's life very, very complicated. I had been elected as the new mayor of our city. That's right. After 8 years serving on the city council and 2 years as deputy mayor, I had won the mayoral election with 67% of the vote. My inauguration was scheduled for the following month. which meant that while Margaret was busy turning my backyard into a parking lot and filing fraudulent documents with the city, she was actually committing these crimes against the incoming mayor. But here's the thing about being mayor-elect. You get access to a lot of information before you officially take office. Information like pending investigations, budget allocations, and yes, records of all permits and applications filed with the city. So while Margaret thought she was pulling a fast one on some random homeowner who would just roll over and accept her authority, she was actually creating a detailed paper trail of municipal fraud that was landing directly on the desk of the person who would soon have the power to launch full-scale investigations into her activities. The city attorney's office had already flagged the fraudulent permit applications, but they hadn't yet connected them to the larger pattern of HOA corruption. When I shared my findings from the financial records with the incoming city attorney, what had started as a property dispute suddenly became a criminal investigation involving fraud, embezzlement, racketeering, and abuse of power. The plan that brought justice now. I could have simply revealed who I was and watched Margaret scramble to undo everything she'd done, but where's the fun in that? Instead, I decided to let her dig her hole even deeper while I prepared a response that would not only get my backyard back, but would also protect every other homeowner in our community from future abuse. Working with the city attorney's office and the state HOA oversight committee, we developed what I like to call Operation Parking Lot Justice. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. We would allow Margaret to continue with her illegal activities for exactly 2 more weeks, documenting everything she did, while simultaneously preparing a comprehensive case that would result in the complete dissolution of her corrupt HOA board and the criminal charges she so richly deserved. During those 2 weeks, Margaret really showed her true colors. She raised all HOA fees by 40%, claiming it was necessary for community infrastructure improvements. She sent violation notices to 6 different families for increasingly ridiculous infractions, including one family that was cited for having non-uniform flower colors in their garden. She even had the audacity to present her husband's construction company with a $50,000 contract to install permanent parking structures in my backyard, complete with lighting and security cameras. But the most outrageous thing Margaret did during this time was organized what she called a community appreciation barbecue in my backyard. That's right, she literally threw a party in the space she had stolen from me, charging residents $25 per person to attend what she advertised as an exclusive HOA member event in our beautiful new community parking and recreation area. The barbecue was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, and Margaret sent out invitations to every household in the neighborhood, describing it as a celebration of community, unity, and shared prosperity. The invitation specifically mentioned that attendees could tour the newly developed community space and learn about future expansion plans for underutilized properties. The moment of truth, the day of Margaret's barbecue, arrived, and let me tell you, she had really gone all out. There were white tents, catered food, and about 60 residents milling around my backyard like it was some sort of community festival. Margaret was in her element, holding court near the buffet table, explaining to anyone who would listen how her visionary leadership had transformed an abandoned space into a valuable community asset. I watched from my kitchen window as she gave what appeared to be a guided tour to several families, pointing out the efficient parking design and the cost-effective gravel surface that requires minimal maintenance. She even had the nerve to set up a little podium near my old rose garden and give a speech about the importance of individual sacrifice for collective benefit. At exactly 2 p.m., right in the middle of Margaret's speech about community values, 3 black SUVs pulled up to my house. Out stepped agents from the State Attorney General's office, the city attorney, the State HOA Oversight Committee director, and 2 investigators from the Financial Crimes Unit. They were followed by a team from the city's Code Enforcement Department, and, just for good measure, a few officers from our local police department. Margaret stopped mid-sentence as this parade of officials walked through my side gate and into the backyard. You could see the color drain from her face as she realized that whatever was happening was serious enough to warrant this level of official response. The conversations around the barbecue stopped, and everyone turned to watch as the lead investigator approached Margaret's makeshift podium. Margaret Thornfield, the investigator announced in a voice that carried across the entire backyard. You're under investigation for fraud, embezzlement, filing false documents, and racketeering. We have warrants to seize all HOA financial records, and we need you to come with us for questioning. The silence was absolutely deafening. You could have heard a pin drop as Margaret stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, trying to process what was happening. The HOA board members, who had been standing near her, suddenly developed a case of collective amnesia, backing away and claiming they had no knowledge of any wrongdoing. The sweet taste of justice, but wait, it gets better. Because at that exact moment, I decided it was time to make my own entrance. I walked out of my house, and as I approached the group of investigators, Margaret finally found her voice. "This is all a misunderstanding," she protested loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Sarah never properly maintained this space, and the HOA has every right to repurpose abandoned property for community use. I have all the documentation to prove that what we did was completely legal." The lead investigator turned to me with a slight smile. "Ma'am, could you please identify yourself for everyone present?" he asked, even though he obviously already knew who I was. This was all part of the plan we'd discussed. "Certainly," I replied, projecting my voice so that every single person at that barbecue could hear me clearly. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I'm the mayor-elect of this city. I'll be officially taking office in 2 weeks, and I can assure everyone here that what Ms. Thornfield has done to my property and to this community is not only completely illegal, but represents one of the most egregious cases of HOA corruption our city has ever seen." The gasps from the crowd were audible. Margaret's face went through about 5 different shades of red as the full implications of what I'd just said hit her. She had spent the last 3 months harassing, intimidating, and stealing from the person who was about to become her city's mayor. The karma was so perfect it almost seemed scripted. "Furthermore," I continued, "the investigation that's about to unfold will reveal that Ms. Thornfield has been embezzling thousands of dollars from this HOA, accepting kickbacks from contractors, and working with real estate investors to artificially inflate property turnover in this neighborhood. The fraudulent permits she filed with the city, claiming my property had been donated for community use, will result in criminal charges that could carry up to 5 years in prison." Margaret tried to interrupt, but the investigator stepped forward. "Ma'am, Anything you say can and will be used against you in court. I strongly advise you to remain silent until you've consulted with an attorney." Then he turned to address the crowd of residents who were still standing around in shock. "Ladies and gentlemen, this barbecue is over. This property has been illegally seized, and we need everyone to clear the area immediately so our team can begin documenting the damage." The cleanup and the aftermath, what happened next, was absolutely beautiful to watch. Within 30 minutes, my backyard went from being Margaret's community barbecue venue back to being a crime scene. The investigators took photographs of everything, from the concrete parking blocks to the fraudulent signage, creating a comprehensive record of the damage that would be used in both the criminal case and the civil lawsuit. The city's code enforcement team immediately issued stop work orders for all the illegal construction, and the state HOA Oversight Committee placed the Greenwood Heights HOA under emergency supervision. This meant that all of Margaret's powers were suspended, all financial transactions were frozen, and a state-appointed administrator would take over HOA operations until new elections could be held. But the best part, the absolute cherry on top of this entire situation, was what happened to Margaret's house. Remember how she had been embezzling HOA funds and accepting contractor kickbacks? Well, it turns out that using HOA money to pay for personal expenses, like the $30,000 kitchen renovation she'd done the previous year, is considered theft of community funds. The state seized her house as an asset in the criminal case, and she found herself facing eviction from the very neighborhood she had tried to rule with an iron fist. The restoration of my backyard took about 6 weeks and cost the HOA's insurance company nearly $85,000. They had to bring in landscaping experts to restore my vegetable garden, replace my sprinkler system, rebuild my rose garden, and repair all the damage caused by the heavy construction equipment. The swing set that Margaret had dismissed as underutilized recreational equipment was replaced with a beautiful new playset that my kids absolutely love. The domino effect, the investigation into Margaret's activities had a domino effect throughout the entire neighborhood. Once residents learned about the embezzlement and the kickback schemes, they started coming forward with their own stories of harassment and questionable fines. The Johnsons got their $750 Christmas decoration fine refunded. With interest, Mrs. Patterson discovered that her non-regulation mailbox fine was completely fabricated. The Williams family, who had been facing foreclosure because of accumulated HOA fines, had their entire debt forgiven when it was revealed that most of their violations were invented. Even more satisfying was watching Margaret's real estate investor partner, Richard Blackstone, squirm when his role in the scheme was revealed. It turned out he had been systematically targeting elderly residents and single parents, knowing they were less likely to fight back against fraudulent fines and harassment. The state attorney general's office filed additional charges against him for elder abuse and predatory real estate practices. The criminal trial lasted 8 months, and I had the distinct pleasure of testifying as both a victim and as the mayor of the city that Margaret had tried to defraud. Watching her sit in that defendant's chair, looking small and powerless in her orange jumpsuit, was a stark contrast to the woman who had stood in my driveway explaining how stealing my backyard was actually doing me a favor. Margaret was ultimately sentenced to 3 years in prison and ordered to pay $127,000 in restitution to the HOA and affected homeowners. Her husband's construction company was banned from bidding on any city contracts for 10 years, and they both faced a civil lawsuit that resulted in the loss of their house, their cars, and most of their personal assets. The new beginning today. As I write this story, my backyard is more beautiful than it ever was before Margaret's parking lot fiasco. The new HOA board, elected by the residents in a fair and transparent process, operates with complete financial transparency and actual respect for property rights. We've established reasonable guidelines that protect both individual homeowner rights and legitimate community interests. The neighborhood has actually become closer as a result of this ordeal. There's something about surviving a corrupt HOA together that really brings people together. We have monthly community barbecues now, but they're held in the actual community park, not in someone's stolen backyard. And yes, I host them in my official capacity as mayor, which adds a nice touch of irony to the whole situation. I've used this experience to push through new city ordinances that provide stronger protections for homeowners against HOA abuse. We've established an HOA oversight committee, created a fast-track process for addressing property rights violations, and implemented stronger penalties for HOA board members who abuse their positions. The most important lesson from this entire experience is that bullies like Margaret count on people being too intimidated, too busy, or too isolated to fight back. She had gotten away with her schemes for years because most people assumed that someone in authority must know what they're doing, even when what they're doing is clearly wrong. The message that changes everything. But here's the real message I want you to take away from this story. And this is important whether you're dealing with an HOA, a corrupt boss, a dishonest contractor, or any other situation where someone is abusing their power over you. Document everything. Save every email. Take photos of every violation. Keep records of every conversation. What seems like a minor property dispute today could reveal a much larger pattern of corruption tomorrow. And never, ever assume that someone can get away with treating you badly just because they claim to have authority over you. Real authority comes with real accountability, and people who abuse their power are usually hiding something much bigger than the specific wrong they're doing to you. Margaret thought she was dealing with just another homeowner who would be too intimidated to fight back against the HOA. She had no idea that she was about to tangle with someone who not only had the legal knowledge to fight back, but who was about to have the official power to launch a full-scale investigation into everything she'd been doing. The parking lot she installed in my backyard lasted exactly 47 days. The criminal conviction that resulted from her actions will follow her for the rest of her life. The new HOA oversight laws that came out of this case will protect homeowners throughout our city for decades to come. Your story matters too now. I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA that overstepped their boundaries? Have you ever had to fight against someone who thought their authority gave them the right to abuse others? Drop your stories in the comments below, because I guarantee you're not alone. And sharing these experiences helps other people realize they don't have to accept being bullied. If you found Margaret's comeuppance as satisfying as I did, smash that like button and subscribe to this channel, because we've got dozens more stories of entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. Hit that notification bell too, because trust me, you don't want to miss what happens when people think they can abuse their power and discover they picked the wrong person to mess with. And remember, sometimes the person you're bullying today might just turn out to be the person with the power to hold you accountable tomorrow. Margaret learned that lesson the hard way, but it doesn't have to take 3 years and a prison sentence for justice to prevail in your situation. Thanks for listening to my story, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll explore what happens when an HOA tries to foreclose on a house belonging to someone they definitely shouldn't have messed with. Trust me, that story has an ending that's even more satisfying than this one.